The historic rivalry between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees started with this guy. On January 5, 1920, George Herman Ruth, otherwise known as Babe Ruth, was traded by the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees, who, 7 years later, set the record for the number of home runs in a season when he hit his 60th homer against the team called the Washington Senators. Bostonians refer to the loss of one of their all-star players to New York and their subsequent inability to win a World Series game as the curse of the Bambino. But there was a second curse of the Bambino that was spoken of in baseball. It was when the final pitch of the 1961 Boston versus New York game allowed the Yankees to win 1-0, and in which right fielder Roger Maris broke the Babe's 60 home run record by one, often referred to as 61 in 1961.
Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right. This could be it. Way back there. Holy cow!
Legend has it that was the most powerful team of players baseball has ever had. It is said that the 1961 New York Yankees lineup was the best that will ever be. I listened to the 61 radio broadcast of that game, and it was something the radio announcer said during the pre-game script that I think is important to reiterate and is appropriate to telling the history of both the 20th and 19th century era of baseball. See, I've traveled back farther in time, and I found the best New York and Massachusetts baseball ever played, long before Babe Ruth or Roger Maris were even born. With that, I'd like to point out that the Armed Forces Radio was also broadcasting that game, and that the military and baseball have always had a relationship. And I'd like to repeat what the radio announcer said because the background noise made it a little fuzzy. He said,
"Well, hope you're all set now for the ball game. Our broadcast today will be joined by the Armed Forces Radio Service, short waving this broadcast around the world to our troops, our boys and girls in service, our ladies and gentlemen in service, wherever they may be stationed. And as they go to the ground rooms, I should like to take a moment to extend thanks to many folks, to all of you people who have tuned in this season and have been so kind, and to those who have taken the trouble to write us and give us constructive criticism, as well as letters of appreciation. It has always been the philosophy of all of us here that on any given day we may say something or do something that may not be just exactly the liking of someone listening in. But it is also our philosophy not to deliberately do any such thing. But we are very grateful for your kind consideration, and thanks a lot to all of you, and that's most sincere.
with that, I'd like to point out that the Armed Forces Radio was also broadcasting that game, and that the military and baseball have always had a relationship. And I'd like to repeat what the radio announcer had said because the background noise there was a little fuzzy. But he said, "I should like to take a moment to extend thanks to many folks, to all of you people who have turned in this season and have been so kind, and those who have taken the trouble to write us and give us constructive criticism as well as letters of appreciation. It has always been the philosophy of all of us here that on any given day we might say something or do something that may not be just exactly the liking of someone listening in, but it is also our philosophy not to deliberately do any such thing. But we are very grateful for your kind consideration, and thanks a lot to all of you, and that's most sincere." And I think that's important because when I talk about the first New York baseball game, there's probably going to be a couple things that hurt people's feelings as I go along with it. I want to highlight the 1961 baseball season and correlate that with my discovery of what I think of as the first Yankee baseball game. Back in 1961, there were two teams from Georgia. One was a professional team, the other was a minor league team, but both went by the name the Atlanta Crackers. Originally, they were going to go with the name Firecrackers, but they felt fire wasn't appropriate. So, I think that's important to note before I tell you about the first Yankees Stadium. Here we go. I want to start with this aerial view of Fort Pulaski, and I'm going to add this split screen view of what most people consider the first Yankees Stadium that was around in 1961. The fort is about a 20-minute drive from Savannah on the coastline of Georgia. In 1861, at the beginning of the Civil War, General Robert E. Lee came down after securing the coastline of South Carolina and rallied the citizens of Savannah to take Fort Pulaski from the U.S. Army. For the first of the 4 years of the Civil War, the Confederates occupied the fort. It was the second year of the Civil War the Union Army had come up with a new type of cannon called the Parrott rifle and the James rifle, which had a bored barrel that had grooves in it that allowed the cannon rounds to shoot straighter and further instead of lobbing rounds like a bowling ball. The Union Army set up batteries on the north end of Tybee Island, giving them a direct line of fire at Fort Pulaski. They used the Parrott rifles to shoot at Fort Pulaski, and by day 2 of bombardments, the Union had broken through the walls of the impenetrable fort. On the morning of day 3, the Confederates raised the flag of surrender. When you visit Fort Pulaski, you'll see a brighter red brick in the areas where the Union replaced the destroyed face of the fort. You'll hear stories of the war where you're told that the Union forces controlled the sea. The siege of Fort Pulaski is the type of scenario that this is referring to. The Confederacy simply didn't have the firepower to retake the fort, kind of like being a firecracker without the firepower. At this point, you're probably wondering what this has to do with baseball. The Union Army at the time was trying to develop a physical therapy routine, so they incorporated a number of sports into the PT practice of the day. There were soldiers from all kinds of places, and guys had different backgrounds. The intent was to come up with a uniform system that was considered an all-American sport. One of those games they came up with set the ground rules for what would later be referred to as baseball. Now, if you'll notice here in the front, these guys didn't call themselves Red Sox. They called themselves the South Carolina Volunteers. In 1862, Union authorities authorized the enlistment of freemen and formerly enslaved men. The St. Simon's Detachment, together with a group of 30 to 40 additional Georgia recruits, joined the Army as Company A, the 1st South Carolina Volunteers. In June 1863, a draft for the 3rd South Carolina Volunteers was held on Ossabaw Island and at Fort Pulaski, as well as Fernandina Beach, Florida, near Georgia's southern border. These groups were later consolidated with the 4th and 5th South Carolina Volunteers to become what you see here, the 21st U.S. Colored Infantry, and here they are fully dressed in blue and armed for combat. Right behind them, you can see the 45th New York Infantry in the rough draft of a diamond with bases around it and a baseball bat. This group self-identified themselves as the New York Yankees. Now, to be fair, there were other players in this affair as well, the Confederates that were kept as POWs in the prison cells at the fort. It's said that the Union forces did allow the prisoners to participate. After all, they were American, and this was an American sport. So, there you have it. A little time traveling back to the first time the New York Yankees, the Red Sox, and the Atlanta Crackers played ball.